Yeah, very interesting illustration, both of the critical role that the facilitator or mediator can play, and how likely it is that in the absence of someone playing that role, that a dispute like this would never get solved. And so that's clearly one of the lessons to me that we have to come away with. Let me pull together a couple of problem areas that we really need to grapple with if we're to take this illustration of the Pine Barrens and make something of it that affects other disputes that we are both concerned about today and inevitably will be, because that's really what the purpose of this day is, to make use of this story to move the role of dispute resolution along in New York State. It seems to me that there are three things we could look at, and as we turn it back over to you now in groups, I hope these things will start to be illuminated. The first is that it's clear that when we're dealing with complex public disputes, where we have multiple interests, we have multiple parties, we have perhaps multiple political jurisdictions, and we often have multiple state, local, and even federal oversight roles, that when we're dealing with those sorts of problems, a number of things can be said. Number one, that as would be the case in any dispute, but certainly in a dispute that is as complex as this, it is predictable that parties will miscalculate the other side's ability to stand toe-to-toe. I mean, we know in the field that people will typically overestimate the likelihood that they will prevail in a battle of wills, whether that's in the political arena or in a court arena. People predictably overestimate the likelihood that they will prevail. The more uncertain the set of circumstances, and that's the case when you have a complex dispute, the more uncertain that calculus is, the more serious the problem is, that people will miscalculate that. So there is an important issue to be looked at in terms of how do we ensure that people have an appropriate respect for the other side's ability to stand firm if it doesn't come to a negotiated process. So that would be one. If we talk about how to make these happen, that's a critical juncture in terms of the perceptions of that. Number two, that there is a problem with complex issues like this being piecemealed in the normal political, regulatory, legal environment. That there is inevitably trigger points that occur because somebody actually proposes a particular development, or an authority issues a particular set of rules on one aspect of the problem, and so we don't ever get the comprehensive forum established in which everything is on the table and everybody is there. The complexity of layers of government and their specific jurisdictions and the interrelationship of all of those, how do we provide a mechanism whereby we can short-circuit that, we can call time-outs on those sorts of provocative individual initiatives and activities so that we can bring people to the table before it escalates and gets out of control. And before decisions get made in a piecemeal fashion that preempt a more rational solution. The third is this very critical problem of who convenes and who supports and facilitates in a complex problem where someone's got to have the interest to do it, someone's got to have the political will, the courage, because clearly Jim may downplay the courage that it took, but clearly it took courage. It almost inevitably does in cases like this. Someone's got to have the interest, the will, the courage, the resources, both financial and technical, and the stature and perceived neutrality. And it may not be perfectly neutral, but sufficiently neutral to be able to get the ball rolling. It may not be all in one person's hands. It may take two agencies to pull that off. But what we have in complex public disputes is that nobody is ordinarily in a position to do that. And so it requires years and years of conflict and litigation before people can even, and even then it doesn't always happen, before people will come to the table. So we've got to grapple with the issue, how do we provide those sorts of institutional frameworks that have the resources, the interest, the stature, the ability to step in and pull people together, because it doesn't exist now except as a fortuity. So those are the kinds of things I'd like us to be thinking about. Were there any specific ideas of how we could work together, concretely? And there may not be, but if you have them, we'd like to hear them.
One, I'll just make one suggestion, which is there is some mechanism in New York State government to also advocate the ADR process, and I speak of the Office for Regulatory and Management Assistance, which has a role in negotiated rulemaking. For example, the suggestion would be to not necessarily duplicate that role, but to enhance on it. State government agencies don't blow their own horn. The Forum can do that. The Forum can probably do a better job of speaking about ADR successes than any government institution would do itself. So you can enhance where a government might leave off.
Very good. Thank you very much. Since we started in that corner of the room, perhaps we could just work our way across this way. Who is going to speak for the second table?
I'll speak for them. I'm Sue Seneca from the Office of Senator in San Francisco. And I have a lot of people here from the Department of Health, and they are Megan, Charlie, Nina, Sue, and Mike, and token mail, and Beth Mears from the Legislative Commission on Solid Waste. I'll quickly go through those three things. And, you know, you took most of our thunder. We have nothing to say, just like you. Anyway, no, I'm kidding. We have many things to say.
So see if you can add one to each category.
Okay. Most of the folks here are involved in hazardous waste cleanup. And so the scenario that repeats itself over and over, go into clean up a hazardous waste site or a landfill, and groups of citizens perceive that they have been damaged by the facility. And so there's this conflict of dueling technology and dueling data and so forth, and that's where the LoGrande comes. So they wanted collaborative arenas for hazardous waste cleanup. The common ground is that the Department of Health wants to protect health, and the public wants to have their health protected, so there would seem to be a lot of common ground, and they would like to see better ways of trying to get to that common ground and get beyond the mistrust.
So is the problem that the department comes in as an advocate for a plan, and then citizens react negatively to it? Is that the scenario?
Sometimes it's perception of risks. They perceive something as much more risky than the scientists say that it is.
Whose scientists? The department's?
Yeah, the department.
Right. So the department has a position, and people are reacting to that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Some of the obstacles, or one obstacle that received a lot of discussion at our table, for resisting, on the agency's part of resisting to come to a collaborative table, is that the agency has a mission and has standards for how that mission can be measured. It being successful, the Department of Health has some pretty stringent, standards for when something is safe, or when. And if you go to a collaborative situation, you may come out with an agreement that will please the citizens, but will, in the end, really not be the best for their health or otherwise. And so there's a conundrum around that. Another one, just to throw one in, was the government model, or the mindset that puts agency people and legislative staff and legislators themselves in the middle of disputes where a party will call and then another party will call, and rather than the parties talking to each other, they expect the person to be in the middle, and then they end up being the problem rather than whatever it really is.
Yeah, very good.
What the Forum can do, a very specific suggestion that this group came up with, was that they found most useful from this morning's seminar the anecdotes. The summaries were great and necessary, but the anecdotes, the truth of the turning points, the behind the scenes, how did you get from here to there, what were the mechanisms, how did positions get brought out, what were mistakes, what were miscalculations, and those kinds of specific types of scenarios they found really helpful.
Very good. So I would propose that one of the things we could do together is to have a dialogue with the department about the alternative roles that a regulatory department can play. The fact that you get calls from people looking to you to be the decision maker, so they're trying to influence you politically, says something about the role that everybody sees you playing. And an alternative role is department as convener of stakeholders prior to having a position. And it's a different way of thinking about an agency's role, and I would love for us to engage in a discussion about that possibility. It's great. Thank you. Next table. Who's?
I'm reporting for this table. I'm going to stand up. One dispute that we came up with that could be
Thank you,
addressed.
Sandy.
I could choose from the list here resource allocation in the state budget. It's called the state budget, the thing that's not getting passed. Or I could pick program consolidation off the list. Multiple agencies doing similar things, but for historical reasons or otherwise, fragmented programs rather than consolidated programs. In the form of obstacles, that alternative dispute resolution isn't readily available to a government executive who might choose to use it. To say, here's a dispute, this is ugly, we got to get everybody together in the same room and work it out, but how do I actually do that? And it's not clear that it's legitimate to do it, or that it's, there's a way. How do you go about it? You have to reinvent this because you might not know any better. And that raises another sort of obstacle, which is that perhaps this doesn't even come to mind. It doesn't get as far as someone wondering, how could I get that group together, and where would I put them, and who would I get to help make it happen? Even before it gets to that instrumental question, it's just not an alternative that comes to mind. Specific things that the forum might do, one suggestion was to make use of this and other real situations in New York State and elsewhere, and tell the story more through newsletters or otherwise, so that more people become more familiar with what is possible.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erin Crotty, and I work for Senator Daley's Hazardous Waste Commission. And our group represented a pretty diverse group of interests. And we focused on land use issues, which is not my forte, but in terms of identifying disputes, we thought that ADR, mediation or facilitation, they have to be larger disputes. They have to be public disputes. They can't be private, one party versus another, because they just don't lend themselves to mediation very well. In terms of obstacles, probably the biggest one we identified is that the regulatory process as it exists now is just not conducive to negotiated rulemaking or facilitation. And which brings us to the next issue, and that's addressing those obstacles. And one is to change the statute, change rules. And then one thing that the forum could do, we thought that since essentially all of these issues are local issues, they need to get the word out to the local governments more.
Good, thank you.
My name is John Turner, and I serve on a staff with State Assemblyman Steve Engelbright. And the group here was a pretty, I think, eclectic group with a diverse background, in which we approached the topic pretty generally. We didn't approach it from any one agency's perspective. Your table, Department of Health, and the token mail there. We came up with, first in terms of just necessary elements, everybody agreed, at least in the notes, that it seems that how important dialogue is. It's something that's obviously evident, but nevertheless worth stressing. I have one note of importance of dialogue, another committed to talking. People need to be committed to having dialogue. Another person was a little less formal, saying people need to let their hair down in communicating. And so that's a very important element for successful dispute resolution. In terms of obstacles or specific examples of where this ADR might be used, we came up with a few, and the one that comes most to mind from my perspective is the Adirondacks in terms of land use. and Dick will know that from a number of our conversations when the whole Pine Barrens issue was playing out, a number of us commented time and time again about, gosh, if we could do it here, it could be done in the Adirondacks. And so that's one area where it may, in fact, be used. I will also just point to a news day that Ray Cowan brought along today. That was this not today? Monday's news day, which highlights 5 specific areas on Long Island that have been really hot spots for land use decisions and have generated a great deal of public controversy. And certainly any one of those 5 could serve as well of areas where resolution might be helpful. In terms of obstacles that weren't discussed already, I think the only one that I would say is that general lack of trust between groups and between individuals is something that's been a major obstacle that needs to be overcome. People's skepticism about other people's motivations and viewpoints is something that's of concern. In terms of what the forum could do, Ray pointed out to me, and I use the word I use. Okay, I'll say BS words instead of what you said. That the forum's mission has a lot of rather passive verbs, such as shall increase, serve, support, promote, foster. And he thinks if the forum is to, I guess, perhaps reach its full potential, that those passive verbs, in fact, should become active verbs. So we get more involved, directly involved in use of ADR.
Yeah, which takes us to a question that we want to grapple with, is how do we institutionalize that? I mean, to do that role, you need institutionalization, you need support, resources, you need legitimization for that role, and that's where we want to see if that's where it has to evolve to. So you put your finger right on where the agenda is, because that's not what we are yet.
The parallel I tried to draw was to be more like a Jim Larocca, to begin the process, not to be a Suffolk County Water Authority that really did the nuts and bolts, but to be a Jim Larocca and an LIA that started it as a catalyst, and then you can back away from it if you have to.
Right.
Yes, that's very much in line with our own thinking, as a matter of fact, and so I'd love for us to continue to talk about what that might look like and how do we build support for establishing it. That's the critical resource need, is somebody who can invest the time, because it's very time consuming, to be the convener at the front end, and there's no money available generally to do it. So you need something that has resources to be able to put the staff time into it. So that's right on the money. Yes?
My name is Lorna Gadwa, and I work in the public participation section in the Division Water at the Department of Environmental Conservation. And we had another eclectic group with a county legislator, a technical negotiator from DEC, an attorney who also works with a citizen activist group. We had a nonprofit organization represented, their nonprofit focuses on balancing conservation and development. Public Service Commission employee, New York State Mediation Association, and then also the DEC Division of Water. The types of disputes that we talked about were, again, the very public, very multi-jurisdictional, sometimes multi-agency, and also activities that involve a regulatory process, such as the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Our obstacles were not really identified as to the alternative dispute resolution. We just aired our obstacles of what fuels these conflicts: adversarial positions, pre-existing perceptions, convoluted perceptions, and the idea that a lot of times there's not a forum for dialogue early enough in the process that may diffuse or avoid the conflict from the start. How participants in our group thought we could work together with the forum is, again, supporting your efforts and supporting your mission to be out there providing information and educational opportunities, but also suggest taking an active role in collaborating with certain agencies or departments so that regulation or regulatory processes start institutionalizing this dispute resolution process, or formalizes the dialogue early on so that those conflicts might be avoided altogether. Also, we came up with the idea of facilitating the building of partnerships using those groups or municipalities that may have already started writing this into their zoning regs or something like that, use them as success stories and show that it really can work and use them as examples.
So part of what we need to work with you on that is to get that information. We need to know where things like that are happening.
Okay, so an information exchange is
Absolutely.
the bottom of it.
Is that it?
Oh,
Tara?
In particular, we'd like to see the forum get involved in writing in ADR's application in the secret process, to actually get it in there.
Great. Very good.